Welcome, everyone, to the very peculiar life of Jean Thurnherr. She was the daughter of Judge Gordon, a lawyer of Los Angeles. He died when she was very young, and she was said to be raised in a couple of different situations that will become clear later on in the story. She was petite and very attractive. She married Albert Thurnherr when she was 18 years old. She was also cunning, and by the age of 19 had been an accomplished burglar for years. She began her criminal career very early. At 14, she ran away from home and became involved with the police of Garden City, where she was arrested. Since then, she led a hit-and-miss existence in various cities and is reported to have been frequently implicated in misdeeds. At 16, Jean Gordon had a record of arrest from San Francisco and was put on probation. Jean had a chance to better herself when she met Albert Thurnherr, a young Berkeley clerk. He said that he met the girl in Oakland and was melted by her tale of having been abandoned by her brother. He married her and had no idea of her dual life. A woman showed up at the police station and identified Jean as a woman who stole a purse containing $5 and a gold chain a few weeks earlier. She went to the woman's house to inquire about a dress, and when the woman left the room, Jean stole the items. The Berkeley police found a bunch of skeleton keys and stolen articles in Jean and Albert Thurnherr's home on Henry Street. They took the items to use in court. Thurnherr was standing loyally by his wife and seeking bonds for her release. He condones her offenses by saying her health is bad. "My wife was kicked by a horse when she was a young girl," he said, "and her health is bad. She has intervals of irresponsibility, and it is when she is so afflicted that she must have committed the deeds accused. Since our marriage, she has been a faithful wife, loyal to me, and a good housekeeper. Her burglaries were sometimes daring. She was once trapped in a home. She locked a bedroom door against the family and then leaped out of a 2-story window to the ground and left no clues of her identity." This arrest was in June 1909. The police let her go to watch her. They shadowed her to her bungalow home on Henry Street and observed her destroying evidence of guilt. Valuable linens, dainty silverware, and trinkets were cast into the fire, and after the girl had been arrested, a search warrant was utilized to recover some of the things said to have been stolen. Without this evidence, the police say, they would have been helpless in getting a confession out of her. 24 hours of questioning broke her down and revealed her story. She told them that her thefts began last November, while she and her husband Albert lived in the Ridgeway Apartments. She stole linens and other articles from the proprietor for several months before she was arrested. She was also questioned about the loss of expensive clothes stolen from other apartments. Jean denied all knowledge of the theft, and the police had to let her go for lack of evidence. Soon after, other neighbors of hers reported articles stolen. In September 1909, the Los Angeles Herald wrote, "Mrs. Jean Thurnherr, age 20, and recent bride, was sentenced to 1 year in San Quentin prison for burglary. She committed several thefts in Berkeley, California through her love for finery. The court wavered between reform school and prison, but since she had been in trouble before, she was sent to prison. Her husband vowed that he would wait for her." In court, a fantastic story of Jean's life unfolded. It all began 5 years before in 1904. Jean at that time was known as Bessie Barkley, the adopted daughter of Judge Barkley. She ran away from home on the discovery that he was not her father and dressed as a boy. She led the life of a cowpuncher, elevator man, errand boy, sailor, and other occupations. Jean seems pathetic when in her diary she tells of her leaving home on the discovery of her adoption. She said, "Well, something in me broke right then. I guess it was the tie which binds the girl to her home. I heard the out of doors calling me, and I wanted to run away from home, from the foster parents who had been so good to me, from the friends and acquaintances who had all along known that I was not Judge Barkley's real daughter. She was 15 years of age and prepared for leaving her home. She felt she was suited for a wild life and stated that she loved boys' games and hated fussy girly clothes. Having learned as a girl to ride on the Spanish ranches outside of Los Angeles, Bessie Barkley, our Jean, was determined to break horses for a livelihood. She applied to Senor Sanchez, a rich Spanish rancher, who heard the small girl ask for work breaking horses with the greatest of glee. Her account of it is interesting. You should have heard him laugh. His fat sides shook like a jellyfish. He called the other men to show them the gringo muchacho who wanted to break horses. One cowpuncher, who was an American, put his hand kindly on my shoulder and said, "The kid's got the right stuff in him, or I'll eat my sombrero." Don't forget, she is passing for a boy. She goes on to tell how she proved herself by riding a bucking bronco until it wore itself out. She said that she only stayed a short time at each ranch and moved on for new adventures. Her stories of adventures through Mexico and Arizona would fill a book. On one ranch in Arizona, she was shot by a Mexican who attempted to kill her partner, Poker Chip Charlie, with whom she was riding the range. The fellow was after Poker Chip, but missed and hit her. It was only a flesh wound. In a fit of despondency, she left the cattle country and came north to Santa Fe, where she was caught by police on the advice of Judge Barkley, who wished her to return home. There she heard of the death of Mrs. Barkley, her foster mother. Her death caused the girl much grief. I don't know if I can believe her wild stories, only because she was always such a thief. Then I read the court psychiatrist reported that Jean Thurnherr is the daughter of the late Frank Gordon, a wealthy capitalist of Los Angeles and part owner of the Arrowhead Hot Springs Resort. She had stated that after her father's death, she left home and had gone through a series of exciting adventures. The physicians state that her mind was not clear on some subjects, and that the girl was the victim of a mania caused by disease. They state that the 20-year-old burglar had become mentally imbalanced on account of severe beatings that it is said she received when at the home of her father, Judge Barkley of Los Angeles, where she was known to her girlfriends and schoolmates as Bessie Barkley. The girl now claims that she was treated inhumanely by Barkley, and the physicians will connect him with the cause of the girl's alleged mental breakdown. It is thought that the death of her father, in a large measure, was responsible for the girl's condition. She became acquainted with Elber Thurnherr a year before the trial and was married. They lived happily for a number of months until she was connected with a series of thefts that police had been unable to explain. Jean was sentenced to 1 year in San Quentin. In 1911, just a few months out of San Quentin, Jean was arrested for the theft of cut glass and other articles from a jewelry store in Berkeley, California. The trial was postponed to investigate into her mental condition. Now we have more wild stories about her time pretending to be a boy in Arizona and Mexico. She supposedly gained skill at playing poker, and her nickname was Poker Chip Charlie. Remember another story when she said her sidekick was Poker Chip Charlie and he was shot at, and she was hit and just grazed? She actually said she was in a pistol duel with a cattleman and that her adventures extended as far south as Panama. I think she missed her calling and should have been an author of fiction. One of her stories is that in 1901, We have a different foster mother named Mrs. Percival. Jean got permission from her to go back to San Francisco. She returned wearing boys' clothing and worked in a hotel as a bellboy. She was arrested for theft several times and various other offenses and placed on probation that she always broke. Once she had even escaped from a convent. I don't think we'll ever really know the difference between her dreams and reality. To try and bring Jean Thurnherr down to earth, Dr. Rowell said, Jean's case may be compared in a way with the case of a man who falls off a ladder and receives an injury by which the inner table of his skull is fractured, and from which he afterward is afflicted with homicidal mania. He suddenly is attacked with a brainstorm, kills his best friend, is arraigned in court, and committed to the penitentiary. If the surgical history of his case is unknown, he pays the penalty of the innocent victim of a prior accident. He said as a young girl, Jean sustained an injury by falling and striking her head. That was the beginning of her destructive behavior. And in a different story, we heard she got kicked in the head by a horse. So, doctors are going to experiment on Jean to see if they can cure her. They perform an operation called the Cushing decompression operation on Jean in April 1911. It was successful from the standpoint of the surgeon, and he had reason to believe that it will prove successful from the standpoint of the psychologist and criminologist. It was the first time the operation was performed to correct moral obliquity. A close examination of the skull showed no scar or other clue to the location of the supposed injury, and Jean could not remember the area injured. Students of the brain have proven that injury to the anterior portion of the brain affects the moral nature. So they operated on that portion of the skull. They chose a spot 1 1/2 inch above and 1 1/2 inch in front of the right ear because she was right-handed. The scalp was removed and the periosteum carefully quartered and laid back without being removed. Then a portion of the skull, about 1 1/2 square inches, was cut through and lifted away from the brain. The latter part of the operation was the most dangerous. Any slip-up, and it could have resulted in permanent and serious injury to the patient. As soon as the bone had been lifted from the brain and the wound thoroughly cleaned, the periosteum was laid back in position and sewed up. This membrane toughened after time and would prove a very tolerable protection to the brain. There was merely a soft spot in the skull. They found that the skull fragment had indeed a spot of abnormal thickness that was causing pressure on the brain. Jean had to remain in the hospital for 4 weeks to recover. 6 weeks after the operation, doctors say Mrs. Thurnherr is a wonderfully bright girl, and as is sometimes true of those with perverted minds, her change for the good is going to be just as strongly pronounced as her bent toward the bad. I have confidence in the girl, and in my daily acquaintance with her, I have learned that she has a wealth of good qualities, which will make themselves felt as she has opportunities in the future to do good to those who were as unfortunate as she. The operation was performed in April 1911 and said to be a success. In June of 1911, just 2 short months later, Jean Thurnherr, or Alice Taylor as she calls herself, was arraigned in police court charged of second-degree burglary. The story is that Jean's husband lost his job and couldn't find another. He worked in the fruit fields, and Jean sold trinkets on the street. She purchased a ticket and went to Los Angeles to reconcile with her father. She stole articles in L.A., and her broken-hearted husband went to be with her. In April of 1913, Jean was arrested again and sent to an asylum. In October 1st, 1913 of that year, Jean was discharged and brought before a judge on a grand larceny charge. She was released on her own recognizance to appear. She appeared before the court, and several superior judges declared that she was a striking example of dual identity. She was a loving wife to her husband, and she loved to be an adventuresome boy. She was released. The charges were erased, and the information was quashed. We can close the book on Jean. Her husband was loyal and loving. I'm sure he had the patience of Job and dealt with the problem successfully once it was identified that Jean had a dual personality. I hope you enjoyed the story of Jean Thurnherr. Subscribe for more stories. Thanks for listening. Bye.